Good morning, colleagues. Patrick here in Singapore. Today I'm going to look at servant leadership theory and specifically how servant leaders can work as school leaders. Before exploring exactly what servant leadership is all about, it's important we position servant leadership theory in education and establish why it should be explored. In my previous research on leadership in schools, I found 2 points that are worth mentioning for this context. First of all, Mitchell and Sackney 2016, in their article School Improvement in High Capacity Schools, Education Leadership and a Living Ontology, they discovered that high capacity schools perform as living systems through the experience of all learners versus a more organizational based managed system. They put people first, and structures and policies act as a supportive rather than defining position. Furthermore, the ideas of Williams, Bryan, and LeBlanc 2012 and Harris 2010, who looked into how personal learning communities are shown to be highly effective in improving learning, support this idea of schools as ecosystems. Highly effective schools are people-centered. Servant leadership is dedicated to prioritizing the improvement and growth of others. Therefore, as I will show later on, I feel that servant leadership is a key component in highly effective schools that operate as ecosystems. Servant leadership theory was first coined by Robert K. Greenleaf in 1970 for the corporate world. However, servant leadership has been present from ancient history until now. Such examples that you may be familiar with are Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and probably the most well-known servant leader would be Jesus Christ from the Christian religion. Greenleaf's first career was as a manager of research and development and education at AT&T. AT&T would be the equivalent of Google today. His second career, however, was as a consultant and teacher, where he worked at such places as Harvard Business School to the Ford Foundation and a variety of nonprofits. He was personally curious as to why, in the 1960s, young people were having such a hard time with established institutions and rebelling against them. He eventually found fault in the institutions, that they were not serving these young people well enough. The core of Greenleaf's conclusions are that a leader should exist to serve the highest priority of others. In his writings in the 1970s, he recognized the work that needed to be done. He believed people will not freely respond to the authority of an institution. Rather, they will only respond to the leaders who are trusted and proven to serve. Servant leadership for him existed so that people could grow to become wiser, healthier, and freer and more autonomous, and eventually so that they themselves would serve others and continue the cycle. Gandolfi, Stone, and Denaud's article, Servant Leadership, an Ancient Style with 21st Century Relevance, clearly shows what servant leadership is not, what servant leadership is, how servant leadership works, and how it can be measured. What servant leadership is not. According to Gandolfi, Stone, and Denaud, servant leadership is often seen as an oxymoron. How can a leader possibly be a servant? In traditional organizational leadership, leadership has its roots in a great man theory, in which the leader leads through their power and their authority. However, it says very little about their interpersonal skills. Servant leaders, or the idea of servant leadership, is often seen as weak. Servant leaders are not weak. They are just as proactive, as ambitious, and as driven as any other leader. But their intentions for their organizations are different from their peers. So what is servant leadership? According to Gandolfi, Stone, and Denaud, servant leadership's primary focus is their followers first, then their mission. That mission is accomplished by helping their followers develop and succeed. Servant leadership is arguably more challenging. It is easier to gain compliance than to inspire acceptance of the requirements to meet your organization's mission. Servant leadership focuses on maxing out the follower's potential. In this way, the organization will follow. Servant leaders are those who empower others to reach their highest potential. According to Gonfi, Stone, and Deneau, servant leadership works because it is highly interactive. The leader and the follower must engage each other, since the primary focus on attaining organizational goals is through the leader serving their followers. According to Gonfi, Stone, and Deneau, servant leadership also works because worker engagement increases. Gonfi, Stone, and Deneau quote research done by Mann and Harder in 2016. 32% of Americans are engaged at work. Globally, 13%. When servant leadership is applied correctly, there is an effective and natural form of reciprocity that takes place between follower and leader, increasing workforce engagement. In other words, when leaders put people first, it benefits the greater organization. A challenge of legitimizing servant leadership is being able to quantify the approach. But servant leadership is measurable. Gonfi, Stone, and Deneau discuss the work of Van Dierendonck and Nuitchen, who in 2011 developed a servant leadership survey, or SLS. To do this, they did 2 qualitative and 8 quantitative studies in 2 different countries. They had 8 samples with 1,571 participants to establish the reliability and validity of their SLS. The Servant Leadership Survey measures servant leadership through 8 dimensions. The 8 dimensions are as follows. Empowerment. Empowering and encouraging the development of the followers. Accountability. Holding individuals and teams responsible for the outcomes in their control. Standing back. Supporting the interest of others and directing recognition for accomplishments to those that deserve the credit. Humility. The leader's ability to acknowledge his or her own limitations and seek the contributions of others to overcome those limitations. Authenticity. Accurately representing both privately and public one's true self. Courage. Challenging accepted models and daring to take risks to find new solutions. Forgiveness. Interpersonal acceptance. The ability to understand where others are coming from and forgive when confronted with offenses, arguments, and mistakes. Stewardship. The ability to act as caretaker and role model in accepting responsibility for the larger organization. The Servant Leadership Survey, therefore, establishes the ability to measure servant leadership in any organization. It does so from the perspective of the follower by measuring 8 dimensions through a 30-question survey. Now that we've established an understanding of servant leadership, let's fit it into education. As members of large organizations, we often become entangled in hierarchy and submit to our position in the organizational structure. We do not acknowledge or leverage our own capacity to shape our organization. However, we are all leaders. This is particularly true for educators. Teachers are naturally servant leaders to their students. Let's revisit Mitchell and Sackney's 2016 idea of a school as an ecosystem that was presented at the beginning of this discussion. Keep in mind, servant leadership's core idea is that it exists to grow people first and foremost. An ecosystem is built on complex relationships that complement and build on each other. If teachers, principals, and heads of school all take on the role of servant leader and serve their followers, teachers serve students and their peers, principals serve teachers and their deputy principals, and head of schools serves all of their followers in the organization, we create a complex ecosystem designed to create the growth of the health, wisdom, and autonomy of individuals who will in turn serve to keep the cycle going. This reciprocal relationship will naturally build on itself to create an ever-evolving learning organization. Personal learning communities are also an important piece of complex learning organizations. The work of Williams, Brian, and Laban 2012 and Harris 2010, discussed at the beginning of this presentation, again reinforce the importance of personal learning communities in highly effective schools. Within personal learning communities, the idea of teachers as servant leaders dovetails nicely in support of building complex learning organizations. Through facilitating the growth of their peers while prioritizing the learning of their students, the servant approach will serve the growth of the whole school. Robert Greenleaf said, "Servant leaders are always searching, listening, and expecting that a better wheel for these times is in the making. To be excellent, we need the help of others, and they need our help to be lifelong learners." Combined with the idea of flattening hierarchy by viewing the schools as ecosystems and connected through nodes of personal learning communities, servant leadership is the ideal energy to drive the rich complexity of school environments. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my thoughts on servant leadership in education. And once you've closed up this presentation, please scroll down on the Google Classroom stream to the interactive questions that are available and take some time to share your thoughts and reflections on servant leadership in your organizations and how you think it may be relevant or not. Thanks again for taking the time.